Live from the Panera Studios, it's the Reading with Robin show, brought to you each week by my friends at Panera Bread, where it's food as it should be. It's where I go to begin my day. There's nothing like that first cup of coffee in the morning. It's also where I go to meet up with friends, and sometimes I even run into a book club. Panera is the perfect place to host a meeting. Everyone's happy with their extensive menu, from the delicious soups and salads to the sandwiches and flatbreads. And don't forget the takeout. The summer months are coming, and who wants to cook? You can order ahead, and your dinner will be waiting for you. That's all at your local Panera Bread. And now, enjoy the show. The Heirs is just out by Susan Rieger. Susan is the author of The Divorce Papers, another book that I loved. She's a graduate of Columbia Law School and has worked as a residential college dean at Yale and associate provost at Columbia. She lives in New York. She knows of what she writes. Welcome to Reading with Robin. Susan.
Thank you so much for having me on.
My pleasure. So you've covered Columbia and Yale, and your characters go to Princeton. How did this happen?
I say in the book that Harry, the oldest, decided to go to Princeton because he knew Princeton would take the other four. I'm not sure I felt that Yale or Harvard or Columbia would do that. Also, Princeton has a kind of athletic buzz about it, and some of the boys were varsity athletes, and that would be, I thought, attractive. And I think they also wanted to get out of the city briefly.
A little bit of country. It's interesting. Yeah. I was thinking that in Princeton's such a fabulous place to be, but that says a lot about the oldest of the five brothers, that he felt that they would take the youngest. They're the five famous, fierce, forceful, faithful, fabled, fortunate, fearless Falkes.
But not fantastic, as Harry says.
Yeah, and
we're not superheroes.
Not quite, but yet I don't know. I was saying to Susan off air, so connected to this family and fell so in love with these characters. And I was reading somewhere that you talk about likable characters. How important is that as a writer, that the readers really like? They're imperfect people in all of this, but that they're likable.
I don't think of being likable as a category of mine. I think, and I'm often surprised when people say in my last book, that they didn't like Mia, or who was the woman getting divorced, or they didn't like Sophie, the young lawyer, because, they're my children, my characters. I thought I liked them a lot.
Sure.
I like difficult people. I like cranky people. So in this book, I suppose they are, but, they all do things that are not upstanding, and sometimes they're mean to other people. One of the sons, Sam, who in some way is my sneaky secret favorite,
totally my favorite.
Can be quite mean.
I love Sam. He was definitely, I know it's hard to pick favorites, and you've drawn all of these characters, and like you say, they are children, but I have definitely had a soft spot for Sam. So you can find Susan on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and right here at Point Street Reading Series in Providence, Rhode Island. Very excited on June 20th. It is a huge lineup, and Susan will be there. It's always really fun. There's nothing like reading a book, loving it, and then getting to spend some time with the author. And The Heirs is a book that you do not want to miss. It's really just fabulous. It's in this gorgeous sort of summer blue, right? This is like the standout color of the summer, so don't miss it. And it is really, it's a special book on a lot of levels. And I've read there was a comparison to the Royal Tenenbaums.
Yes,
love that. That's a favorite movie of mine. Is that something you thought of while you were writing it? Did you ever think?
I didn't.
Okay, no,
I didn't. I did think of Wharton, Edith Wharton, because she writes about a certain section of New York society, and in some way there's that. Though my favorite Edith Wharton is The Custom of the Country, and the heroine of that is, a Midwesterner with, a Trump-like character, a woman. But subsequent comparisons have been to J.D. Salinger's stories, and then in the NPR one, which did the Wes Anderson movie, he also said Fitzgerald and the Brontes. And I thought, wow.
Heady company,
this
right?
This is swell. This is swell.
It sure is swell. And one of the things at the root of this book that I find fascinating when it comes up as a topic is parents and their secrets and what is divulged to children and how do things remain a secret. I don't know, sometimes I feel like things are so long buried that you could almost forget that it is a secret. But talk a little bit about what transpires between parents and children and what children are to know and how parents remain their own entity aside from their children.
There were two secrets in my family on my mother's side. The first one was when I was 11 and my grandfather died, and he was a rather well-known labor leader and strike leader, and he had a rather large obituary in the New York Times, and we were thrilled and proud, and we read it all the way to the end, and when we got to the bottom it said, he is survived by his son and his two daughters, and we only knew one daughter, our mother.
Wow.
And so we went to Mom and said, who is this person?
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that my grandfather had been married before and had a daughter from his first marriage, and my mother said she was always mean to her and her brother, and she had seen her at the funeral, but she had never seen her as an adult, and she never saw her again after the funeral, and we never met her. Now, the second secret was revealed about, I would say, 15 years later. I was 11 the first time, sometime in my 20s. I was moving in with my first husband, and my grandmother, who was the wife of, not the wife of the labor leader, but the woman he lived with for 30 years, gave me sheets, queen-size sheets for my bed, and more or less was saying, what you're doing is okay, and this was 1971, so it was early for that kind of thing. And then she said to me, well, you know, your grandfather and I were never married.
Ah.
And I said, oh, no, I didn't know that.
Thanks for sharing. It's right, how interesting the way that just sort of, right.
And Nana, so I asked I never said anything to my mother because that's the other thing. Children keep their parents' secrets. As if it must have been in some way painful to my mother, and I must have recognized that, and I never said it. 5 years later, my father mentions it to me, and I said, I know. Nana told me, and neither of my sisters knew. And then at some point I did say it to my mom. I said something about family secrets, and she said, what secrets? I said, well, you know, Nana was never married to grandfather. And she said, oh, that. End of conversation.
Sounds a little like a bit like Eleanor, right?
Yes,
oh, that.
Yeah, that kind of coolness. Yeah, she wasn't going to go anywhere. I don't think children ever understand their parents.
Mm-hmm.
I think until they're about 30, they only see their parents as children looking at parents from their own point of view. In fact, you know, I have a friend whose parents had a very, very tough war said he was 26 before he realized how tough it was. This was talking about World War II. His parents were separated for 6 years, and I thought, we don't think of how hard these things were for them. We just think of how hard they are. I remember as a child thinking I was incredibly put upon, and you know, I didn't have to pay bills. I didn't have to go to work. I didn't have to do the taxes. I didn't have to buy food. I didn't have to make dinner.
Yet put upon.
But I was put upon, right?
Exactly. I like that. But I'm still back to Eleanor of that.
Yeah,
because I can't imagine in no conversation in this family has anything ever been succinctly brought to a halt. Like, oh, that would have been a 2 or 3 week conversation. So I find it fascinating, and that's why I love to read stories about families. And I was reading someplace that you say, you know, all of your stories are about families in some way.
Right.
And I'm speaking with Susan Rieger. Her book, The Heirs, which came out last week, is just too fabulous to put down. I adored it. I just soaked this book up from the very first page. You know, when you're just hooked right away and you're like, okay, I'm settling in. I love this. That's what happened when I sat down with the Heirs. But there were so many gems here and talking about, there's a part where Eleanor, the mother, is talking and saying to, I think it was Sam, something about it's so interesting to hear her son's view of her marriage, because we're looking at, you know, how our marriage or whatever the relationship is reflected back on our children, and hearing about this, it's almost like, who are you talking about? Which family?
And I think, and one of the other points of the book is that the children don't really, these 5 boys, I think, just look at their parents as their parents for too long a time. I mean, at the end of the book, Harry, the oldest, is 40, and the youngest is 32. And they still have this sense of their parents being just their parents. And when the crisis happens in the family, Eleanor refuses to sort of change her idea of what happened. And the boys just are rewriting their past as if everything is different now. And I like that tension, too, about how we hear news from our past and decided it changes everything. But in fact, does it change the lived experience?
If you didn't know what's really different.
Know. Right.
If you didn't know, and which is one of the things, the heart in a novel of the secret, and what's the secret, and then maybe it not being what the reader is thinking as they're going along, but the way that the children are rewriting things in real time, and the back and forth with the actual time period is really fascinating, because there is this tendency to kind of think, okay, well, if I didn't know this, how would what really has changed? But and then I think the secrets that certain children know, and who do they share it with?
Right.
So is everybody on the same page even, is really interesting, because somebody can blurt something out. I've seen it happen, and everybody's like, wait, what? Were you not there? Did you not hear that? Or, just the way people process things. So did you start, the nugget of this book and the idea of inheritance, which is really a fraught discussion on any given day. Like, what was the central sort of idea that you started with, and then to build out
I was
the
working
family?
on a second book about, like the divorce papers, except this one was about a man making a will, and it's the book I'm actually working on now. And it's about an old man. I've made him much older than Rupert in the Heirs, who's 89, and he has 3 children, one of whom has manic depressive illness. And he's trying to figure out how to set up his will to protect her, who can be a major spendthrift, but also the other 2 children, because she, in one of her manic phases, she can go after them. And parents are usually incredibly irresponsible on this level. But since it was another epistolary novel, I decided I have to have different kinds of documents in it. So I wrote a short story. I'd never written a short story. I'm such a late novelist that I feel I have to try everything.
I love that, because why not?
Right. That's right. I take all first chances because there may not be second ones. And so I wrote a short story, which was Eleanor and Rupert and the 5 boys. And at the end, there was a hint of dubious birth, but it had to do more with the 5 sons. And my editor read it and said, would I think of turning it into a novel? Because she said, I like these characters so much. So it became something different as I wrote it.
I think that's such a neat, you sit down to write something where sometimes an author will talk about characters in a story. I've heard this, sometimes where it starts as a short story, but another person will look at it differently, and then it's like a whole different life. You thought you were writing a short story. Did you finish the short story as was, or no? You went on to the book?
No, I had to change it. I had to make it longer. But in many ways, it starts out similarly. There was a kind of streamlining of the voice. I cooled the voice as I wrote it. I like that I like a cool, watchful voice that doesn't tell you too much what people are thinking, but only what they're saying.
So you can figure things out, or
you
don't really, and the reader doesn't really need to know everything.
No.
Also, are you a reader that tries to figure things out as you're going along, or do you sort of just take the ride?
No, I pretty much take the ride, except if I'm incredibly anxious reading certain kinds of mysteries, and then I say, is everybody alive at the end? A friend of mine who was almost at the end of the Heirs said to me, I'm almost there. Tell me they don't all get killed in a sad accident.
Well, I know people that read the end first. I thought that was just a real one-off until, after years of hosting Reading with Robin. And you're tuned into Reading with Robin, I should say. Please visit readingwithrobin.com. Find me on Facebook, on Twitter, everywhere. But the topic came up several times where I said, wait, really? I would never think of reading the end, ever. I can't imagine. But I know people want to know everybody's going to be okay, or what happens, maybe.
Right, yes. I've lapsed on that point. I try not to, but I have. So basically, my favorite books as I've grown older are books where not much happens. The molecules are rearranged, but life continues to go on in some way, sometimes sadder, sometimes more happy. But for instance, I love Netherland, Joseph O'Neill's book.
Yeah.
And in a way, too, I also loved To the End of the Land, David Grossman's book, even though it's set against a very hard event in Israel. It's basically the story of this woman and this father of one of her children walking across Israel and talking.
Wow.
And it's amazing. I like things like that.
What's the title of that one? I need to write this
To
down.
the End of the Land.
Okay, thank you.
It's beautiful and heartbreaking. And they're walking across the land because their son has been called up to be in the Israeli army, and she doesn't want to be home to get the call if something happens to him. So they just walk across the land. They walk and talk. It's a really remarkable book. I think he's a remarkable writer. And it's set against painful, hard things, but there's the intimacy and the difficulty of their relationship. It's wonderful to read about.
Well, I wrote it down because I never like to miss a great title. Yeah. I won't necessarily get to it. I might get to it, but I think there's something about knowing that you have that title. Otherwise, you'd get an email from me at some point saying, Susan, what was that book that you mentioned where nothing much happens except for it's set against this backdrop? Right. And those are my favorite kinds of books and movies as well. That kind of idea of it doesn't have to be this big sweeping storyline. It's so intense just in the smallest movements that I'm glued. And, I'm a huge fan that way. And you're talking also about writing this next one in the epistolary style. Are you a big letter writer? Are you a letter saver?
No, I'm not. I just like sort of battling points of view. Mm-hmm. And that's what an epistolary novel gets you. I'm also incapable, as you can tell from the Heirs, of telling a story sequentially or chronologically. I'm always going backwards and forwards and revealing things at different times. As I said, I also like pretty large, cast of characters, sort of, Russian novel level. Mm-hmm. I like lots of people.
Well, there are lots of people to like.
Yes.
Susanna is one of my favorites.
Right.
Talk about that relationship a little bit, Susanna and Sam.
Susanna and Sam meet the first day that they're both at Princeton, and they fall in love, except that Sam is gay, and Sam loves Susanna as a friend, and Susanna loves him as a friend, but she's always half in love with him throughout the book. One of them says that they found each other in Plato's cave or on the mountain, and they lost each other and then found each other at Princeton. And it's a friendship that runs through the book. Well, there's a plot that I suppose we shouldn't reveal.
We should never. That's the big part of Reading with Robin. I always tell people, because sometimes they go on Facebook and they could see that I'm interviewing Susan Rieger of the Heirs, and I always say, or they'll say, I'll listen after. And I promise people there are no spoilers. Right. I guess I can't say I've never, but I would say there's never been a spoiler. Right. So we're safe here, Susan.
Right. And Susanna becomes very quickly almost a member of the family, a daughter, close to both Rupert and to Eleanor. And one of the things I do is I make everybody in the family except Rupert looks alike. And that includes some of the significant others.
Right, the add-ons, right? I know.
They're all tall, lean, and dark.
Which is very interesting, and certainly for a reason. But I love the way Susanna is one of these family members where they're happy to have a daughter figure, and also she just fits so well. But Sam has Andrew. That's part of the storyline as well, and theirs is a very interesting storyline. They're just all, I found myself so involved in everybody's piece of the book, and as you talk about going back and forth in the time periods, I love reading a book like that. I really do. I tell stories the same way. I can't tell a story from start to finish without going, well, we got it, because you do need the background to fill in the pieces, and no different when you're reading a novel. It's so rich and satisfying, and I just love it. And I'm speaking with Susan Rieger. I should say also, because I was very excited, People Pick Book of the Week, which is huge, right? I mean, there are a lot of places that you want to be seen, but I've always been a huge fan of if I'm at the checkout line, I go, wait, who'd they pick? Because it's a huge, big deal. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. Yes, I was, as Mel Brooks would say, thrilled and delighted.
Love that, Mel Brooks.
Although one of the things that, and it's interesting, people haven't I haven't seen it in reviews or comments, is there's a subsidiary story about an old boyfriend.
Oh, I didn't. Yes.
Of Eleanor's,
yeah.
Which is in some way it's a part of the essential background, but it is a way of sort of giving somebody a past.
I didn't want to bring that part up, but yes, I love that. I mean, she's such a fully formed character and fascinating. I know women like this, so it was very real to me reading her story, her storyline, and about her past. That you will have to read the Heirs to find out what it is. I also really enjoyed the whole English versus American discussion.
I was married the first time for 18 years to an Englishman. And in my generation, I was 24 to 42, and so those were very big, important years. And we went to England every summer, and I had all these English relations who are very different. Also, my family is Jewish and Italian, and his family is English Catholic. And as you can see, there's most of the Heirs is made up. It's not a family at all like my own. I was in analysis for 10 years. I'm too bored with my own life.
But it's really helpful to have all of this experience and be able to weave it in, and it's not yours, but you take ownership of it in your characters and as the story unfolds. So it's really, I figured there might be some connection, but I never fall into that. How much of this is yours? Because I can't stand when people sort of jump to that, because our experience informs us. So of course, different things will jump in, which is why I asked you off air if there was a dog in your life, because whenever I read about a dog, I think, okay, they must be a dog person. And before I let you go, what are you reading this summer, enjoying, have on your stack, ready to roll, or want to really get to?
Well, the book I've just ordered which I have read, but I haven't read in 40 years, is All the King's Men.
Oh, wow.
Because I was writing a piece for LitHub on Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Politics has occupied a big part of my life recently, and I started looking in our copy of All the King's Men, and it's just fantastic about a kind of, you could either call him a populist or, in the case of All the King's Men, a demagogue. Mm-hmm. But it had wonderful commentary on what I see going on now. And so I decided I really wanted to read it again. And I have the new David Grossman book called A Horse Walks into a Bar.
Uh-huh.
And I actually just read, which I just loved. It's a graphic novel for, I would say, 10 to 13 or something, called, I have a granddaughter who's that age in that group, A Year Without Mom. It's a graphic novel. I mean, it's not a heartbreaking story. Mom has to go to America for graduate school, and it was just, I thought,
so
so
she's
terrific.
Not gone. She's just
over for a while. Pond. Yeah. And my stack of books at the moment is reproaching me. When I'm writing, I tend not to read. I mean, for instance, I just bought Joan Didion's also, South and West.
Yeah.
Never read Didion. You're just so demoralized. You'll never put another word on the page.
That's what I've heard. It can be a little, I'm sure.
Yeah, so you just don't want to read other people. That's what I have. I think I'm looking at my pile right now. I have Raymond Carver stories there. Mm-hmm. And then I always have the collected stories of Lydia Davis. I always like to sort of fall into them. And you can fall out of them very easily, too.
Which is bad. Sometimes that's just what a reader is in the mood for. Do you ever photograph these and put them up on Instagram so people can see?
Oh, could see what I'm reading.
Yeah, people love that. They really do. I think, I know the Reading with Robin gang loves to know, and authors will post sometimes on
what
the
are they
Facebook
reading?
Page. Yeah, if you would like to, post it on Reading with Robin. I know that.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Except, I forgot. Lincoln and the Bardo is that's actually on the top of my pile. But I'd have to be honest and say what I'm not reading at the moment.
You can do that.
Yeah, the aspirational reading list, right?
So the lists continue whichever way, right?
Right.
Maybe
Rachel Cusk.
Oh, I haven't
loved
read
Outline, and I'm moving into Transit, but I think she's terrific.
And can you read more than one at a time, or do you go one?
I can read fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, same.
But I can't read. I can't read more than one novel at a time. But I can read more than one nonfiction at a time if they're different.
So that they don't sort of blend in, and you think, wait,
right.
Why does that sound familiar? And you mentioned your 13-year-old granddaughter, so you have readers that you can share. Which are some of your favorites that you shared with her, where you're like, oh, I can't wait till they're old enough so I can give them.
One of my favorite books was I read it with my daughter, and it's called The Story of Vanya, and it was published in 1943 by Random House. And it has beautiful sort of saturated color. I think of the color as being Technicolor almost. And it's and I lost it. And so now you can only find it in used books. And so I got that from my granddaughter, and I've got it from my grandsons too. And the other one is, because I came from a very left-wing family, I just bought a book called The Animals Conference, a used book, too. You can't get it. My grandfather had given it to me when I was about 10 or 11, and it's about animals kidnap all the children of the world and take them to Animal Skyscraper to impose peace on people.
Sounds like just what we need right now.
I loved it, and we were raised up without religion, but if anybody voted for a Republican, you might be disowned.
Well, the religion of deeply beloved books, it sounds like, and there's nothing like sharing those with the next generations. And just even hearing you talk about a book that your grandfather gave you, I mean, what's better than that?
Well, my daughter owns a children's bookstore. She's
in
a
New York?
novelist too.
I didn't.
But she owns a children's bookstore, and I've taken to reading much more children's books than I ever would.
I did not know that. Is it in New York?
It's in New York. It's called Stories. It's a wonderful bookstore, and it's beautiful. Of course, it's in Brooklyn.
That's awesome. I'm writing that down. So give a plug to it. So it's Stories.
Oh, yes, it's a wonderful bookstore. It's called Stories, and it's also it's a bookshop and storytelling lab. They have after-school programs and reading, and every Sunday they have a writer come and talk about the book he or she is writing. And they have programs for parents, too. Friday, Karen Thompson Walker, who did The Age of Miracles, is coming to talk for parents. And it's on Bergen Street off Flatbush, right around the corner from, if you live in Brooklyn Larder. And it's not very close to the Barclays Center, too.
Yeah, I know the area very well. So that's Stories in Brooklyn. Well, next time I'm around, I will check that out, and I will say hello.
Please do,
You buried the lead there, Susan. She's got a bookstore. I mean, it's so magical to me, really.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's and I love the idea of novelists doing, Emma Straub just opened one in New York.
Books are magic.
And Patchett owns one, and Maggie has small children, and it's hard to write with small children.
You need a pen.
Alice Munro didn't manage it, so there you go.
I know. It's, time and place. Well, this is a pleasure, and I am so excited for the readers to find the Heirs. And I will see you in Rhode Island at Point Street Reading Series on Tuesday, June 20th. It's always the third Tuesday, and you have a fabulous lineup of authors that you're reading with. You're reading with Max Winter and Julie Bunton and Julia Fierro.
Right.
It's going to be a huge event, and I'm very excited. This is such a treat, Susan. There's nothing like talking to book people. Book people are the best people. And
mutual, I'm sure.
I cannot wait to meet you. And The Heirs, it's out by Susan Rieger. It is fabulous. Reading with Robin alert. This is the kind of book I love, and I love sharing the books that I enjoy so much. So thank you so much for your time, and I will see you soon.
Thank you.